Hi, this is your instructor, Teresa Pelkie. Welcome to our class.
I would like to go over 3 of the examples in the sample code files for the document object model. The first one is retrieving the value from a text box without chaining. And because I am using the actual code files, there is a lot of explanatory information in the actual web page. Alright, so I want to draw your attention to the browser over here on the right. And here we have a text box. In front of the text box we have a label element and it says first name. And I'm going to click to see the value. And if I were to actually click that right now, nothing's going to happen. Unfortunately, the only way that we can actually start using the document object model is with some kind of interactivity. So I will be using an event, a click event, and I will be calling a function. We will be learning about this next week, but I will just go over it briefly now. Alright, so let's take a look at our HTML code here on the left. Alright, here's my HTML for the label. And this is the technically correct way of laying out a form in HTML. You should always have a label element for accessibility that corresponds to the information that you're requesting in the form element. So here's a text box, input type equals text, ID equals first name, name equals first name. Now, we should know that JavaScript uses the ID to uniquely identify, and that's where getElementById comes in. Name is an HTML attribute, and if we were to send the values from a form to a script on the web server for processing, the web server identifies the value using name, or it identifies the form element using name. So name is for the server, ID is for style sheets and for HTML and for JavaScript. Alright, now here I have input type equals button. This is a generic click button such as we see over here on our left hand side, right hand side. And the value of that click button is coded in by the value attribute. Alright, now I have an ID equals calculate. Notice there is no JavaScript inside the body. Everything is done by calls in the head section using the document object model. But here again, because we're going to be clicking on this button, we need to reference it. So how do we reference it? Right now we're referencing it by its ID. Alright, so let's take a look at our head section. Alright, now the first thing I have up here is a function and inside my script. Now, remember we talked about this idea of holding back code that references elements in the page until the page is loaded. And we always need to be doing that because there's no way that JavaScript knows where this text box over here on my right is, or what the ID of this button on my right is, until the page has loaded. Alright, so here I have window.onload over here in my code, and I'm calling the anonymous function. Now the only thing that really needs to be in here is the things that we're going to be doing. Alright, now, one thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be clicking on the button. So in order to click on it, we need to make an object reference to it so that we can do something with it. Alright, so here we have document.elementById, ID calculate. Alright, we already looked at down here in our code. Here's input type equals button, ID equals calculate. So we're making an object reference to our button. And we're storing that object reference in a variable. Now this is the general procedure. Now, we're using that variable .onClick. This is an onClick event. Events are things that we do to objects. Alright, so we're saying that we click on this thing, which is an object reference to our button. We're calling this function. Alright, now the function is defined up here. The function does not need to be defined inside the window.onload. Why? Because it's not going to be called until the page loads anyway. There's no way that we're going to call this function until we actually click this button over here on the right. All right, so whatever this function does not have to be inside the onload. We can put it up here. All right, so now this function contains the statements that we need in order to retrieve this value. All right, so anything that is typed into this box, such as Teresa, now I'm on the right-hand side in my browser, we can retrieve. All right, how do we retrieve that? The first thing we always do is we have to make an object reference to the HTML element. In this case, it's our text box. All right, let's go down and take a look at it one more time. All right, here we are. Input type equals text, ID equals first name. All right, the ID value is first underscore name. So if I go up here to my head section, here I have document element by ID first name. Now notice I have a lot of comments around my code. All right, we're storing this object reference here in the value first in a variable called first name. Now we're going to store more, and we're going to add some information. We're going to rewrite this variable. So now we have first name.value, and that's the value that I just typed in here over here, Teresa. So if I were to say alert first name, and I were to say click to see value, there we are. All right, so this is the basics for retrieving values from a text box. This is a very common process in the industry, obtaining form data, and we will be using that in this class. There's a lot of examples in the book that uses forms. All right, so essentially, you first make an object reference to the form element, and then the value property, this is a property of that object. Now notice I've done this in 2 steps. Let's look at how we do it in 1 step. All right, so at the bottom of our document in the head section, in the body section, it's the same form. All right, so in 1 line of code, I can say document element by ID first name dot value. I store it in the variable, and I can use the alert. Everything else is the same. We're using the same function. All right, I'm going to put a different name. I'll say Emma. Emma Poodle. She's my little poodle. And there we are. Okay, so now let's take a look at another example where we're changing the node value using the document object model. It gets a little trickier. All right, so let's take a look at the right. What we're doing is we're changing the content, the value of the text node, when I click the button. Here again, there's no way to virtually do this when the page loads. It has to be done by some kind of user action. So I need to use a function and I need to use an event. We're going to learn about this next week. All right, let's take a look at our HTML. In the body section, here's H3. ID equals my H3. This content will be replaced with hello world. All right, so this is my element. My element is an H3 element. This is my ID, my H3. Here's my click button. Input type equals button. I'm using ID equals calculate. I change the value to say click to change the content. So there's my button over here on the right. All right, let's take a look at our head section code. All right, here we have our onload event. Because remember, we're going to be clicking on this button over here on the right. So we need to wait until the page loads to establish the object reference to it, because if we do that too soon, JavaScript will not know where that is. All right, so here we create our object reference, get element by ID, calculate. We're going to store it in this variable called button calculate. Now when the user clicks on that JavaScript object, which is the button, when they click on it, we're calling the onClick event, and we're going to call a function change value. Now the function change value is going to be called after the page loads, so we don't necessarily have to have that function in our onload anonymous function here. All right, so here's our function up here, and we have 1 line of code because we're chaining. There's our object reference. Now our object reference is our H3 heading. All right, here it is down here, my H3. And let me go back up here. Just move this page over a little bit. Here we go, document.getElementById, the object reference dot the first child. What in the world is the first child? The first child is whatever is in between the opening and closing HTML tags. That is the first child. Remember, this is a node. We have an element node. The element node contains a text node. All right, now, so first child dot node value. What in the world is node value? Node value is the value of that node, a text node. So what we're doing is we're setting up to change it. So if we have an equal sign, and on the right-hand side of this equal sign we have something else, what we're doing is we're changing. We're setting the node value property of the first child of this element to hello world. All right, so remember, what is on the right is assigned to what is on the left. And this is unfortunately the long way of accessing that text using the document object model. And the document object model was never easy to use, which is why developers have invented things such as frameworks. And we will look at this concept again when we start learning jQuery, because jQuery essentially is the easier way of doing this than using the document object model. All right, so for the proof of what I said is correct, if we look to the right, I'm going to click to change the content. There we go. It's hello world. All right, so I wanted to explain these three examples. Here again, the sample code is in the textbook, and the explanations, the sample code is on the public box folder, and the explanations are in the textbook. And this is something that we will be doing for the assignment this week.